the fact we're all EMP guys and not power guys is showing itself.
It's always a unit. It's always the
unit.
How much is it in barrels?
Yeah, exactly. BOEs. I could do that all day long.
Show me where I can divide by 5.8.
Exactly. So last weekend,
are we on?
Went to Vegas. Well, it's rolling.
It is?
We don't do the cheesy drum beat and
yeah, that's old news.
I like the old drum beat.
Well, let's do it.
We should stop doing this. All right. So last weekend, took the eldest to Vegas. That's what she wanted for her 21st birthday. The girlfriend was like, oh, y'all should go eat dinner here, go see a show here, go get a special drink there. Nope. Been playing online poker. All she wanted to do was go play poker. I'm like, okay.
Wait,
so
what's her age?
21.
Okay.
Turns 21. This is what she wants. So we show up.
So since you took her, she wanted to play high stakes poker.
Exactly. She needed the bank, I think, is why I was there. But anyway, so Dad's hope for this trip is lose a lot of money, long run, cheap lesson, get rid of the potential degenerate gambler that I am raising. So we get there, Friday night, big steak, nice bottle of wine. We go play cash games. Boom. She loses a lot of money. I'm like, great. Next night, tournament at the Encore. I finished 12th, of course, top 11 pay. But anyway, she finished 10th. So she got paid at a tournament. She's feeling a little better. Loses all that money and then more playing cash games that night. I am so pumped up. Dad, I never want to come back to Vegas. This is horrible. I hate it. She hits a $2,200 slot on the flight home in the airport. He's texting me every day, Dad, when are we going
back?
Yeah. So
you just screwed yourself.
We screwed ourselves. So, hey, real quick, let me do a public service announcement. October 30th, 31st, we have our FUZE conference coming up. It's going to be at 713 Music Center in downtown Houston. FUZE is our South by Southwest of energy technology. The key is, hey, if you make energy in any way, oil and gas, renewables, etc., show up. If you move it in any sort of way, pipelines, transmissions, whatever, show up. If you consume it in any sort of way, data center, whatever, show up. Let's check egos at the door. Let's talk about technology and how we're going to do this.
And I hear the new OctoQ, the EV charging company for apartments and condos, are going to be showing off their new tech.
Nice.
So,
do we have a designated speaker from the company?
Maybe. I'm working on that.
Well, you know what's so funny is you're like listed above me in terms of the speakers there, and they haven't told me
how's that
speaking,
happen?
but I don't know.
At least you're listed.
The first
you're
will be
not on the
last,
list?
and the last will be first.
Why don't you give us some of the headliners who are on the list?
There
Chuck?
we go. John Arnold's going to be there, legendary Enron trader. Will be there. Bobby Tudor's giving the other keynote, and Bobby Tudor was a longtime Goldman banker and then founder and CEO of Tudor Pickering Holt until I think Maynard joined, right? Or was Bobby always chairman?
Bobby was always chairman. I believe. I was much later.
There you go. So anyway, and the stuff we talk about at this conference is fascinating. We'll do panels on cloud tech, to intelligent wellbore design, to geothermal, to scaling renewables. I always thought that was the coolest thing from last year's FUZE conference. As a solar guy came up to me and said, Chuck, I need to meet an oil and gas guy. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, I just need to meet one. We need to talk scaling because nobody's scaled an oil and gas, scaled a business like oil and gas. So lo and behold, I introduced him to a COO of an oil and gas company, and I would give anything to have that hour and a half recorded because it was fascinating. It was like literally down to how do you deal with employee drug testing issues and just all the stuff you don't even think about when you're trying to scale a business.
I don't think they drug test anymore.
They may not, but we talked about it.
It seems to have at least faded to the background, which gives you a little pause, I guess. I think I read something about a pilot who had had a few lines of cocaine and then attempted to fly a plane, and then he got nailed by someone he had texted, one of his colleagues he had texted, who kind of headed off that disaster. I have to look up the details of that story.
Probably a Malaysian-based company.
I still want to find that plane.
I do.
I still want to.
That's
find
the
that plane.
question.
All right, Kirk, your favorite subject. Why don't you kick us off?
Oh my gosh! So
We're
this
back
is great
here again.
So my favorite CEO, Wael, who took over
Your guy.
Shell.
Your
Yeah,
dude.
I mean, I said, look.
Hey, the key to successful name dropping is always make him sound like the best friend.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
he's totally my bestie.
There you go.
Wael CEO, he's been on seat, less than a year. There's an internal yammer, which I think sucks. Like that platform is so bad. However,
we had that in 2002.
It's so bad. But well, Shell has it. It tells you what you need to know. But two Shell executives from the renewable, now called low carbon division, they basically pen a letter on the internal platform, gets picked up by Reuters. Over 80,000 people viewed it. 1,000 people liked it, which created internal dialogue. And basically, the internal letter said, "Hey, Wael, we're worried because you're basically going sort of against the low carbon strategy that Shell had before you became CEO, and we're worried about our jobs and we're worried about the direction of the company." And this came after Wael and others spoke on their investor day, because Wael is actually trying to put the company on a path to greater profitability, greater dividend returns, and increase their multiple, which is something we've talked about before. So this created a shitstorm internally, and now is public. So it's incredible.
How many of those 80,000 likes were shareholders?
That was all internal employees. Yeah, exactly. Well,
so all of them.
Yeah,
100%.
And so, how does the thing that was fascinating to me about this article is I totally get kind of the evangelical nature of the letter. We have to say. I get that. Can understand that. I can understand kind of the fervor around it. But how is it pressure? I mean, is he not running the show? Is there internal dissent there that this fed the fire to?
Number one, it's a European company. So it's more committee led than, like, it's not the powerful CEO, American CEO. It's a little bit bit.
I always thought of Shell, especially when they had two locations in Europe, as a weaker federalist, at least weaker from a centralized top-down authority and decision-making. I always thought of Shell as being more federalist.
This is true. Wael, though, is very influential, and he's CEO. However, this is a company that has HR on the executive committee. So it's an important role. So people are important to Shell. And if 80,000 people or 1,000 people liked it, 80,000 people read it, doesn't mean they agree. Now, here's the age-old question that I've had with others before, is you need to be able to separate your hat as an employee and as a shareholder, because those are two different things. I think when I read the letter, it basically, in my opinion, was I am an employee and I'm worried about my job. I didn't read it as I'm a concerned shareholder, because I think what Wael is trying to do is saying, hey, we belong next to companies like ExxonMobil. We have great capital discipline, which is exactly what Wael is trying to do. Employees don't like it, though.
Interesting.
And I think that has a lot to do with really the corporate culture and societal differences between the different locations of Exxon being here in the U.S. and Shell being domiciled in Europe.
Absolutely.
Stating the obvious, but that's, I don't know anyone within those companies who is incentivized or has a significant amount of their comp tied up in non-cash type of things. In other words, company stock, that wouldn't want the stock to perform better. And that's, that's no different than what the external constituents and shareholders are telling Wael and others more loudly that this is what we want. Kind of slow the roll on these investments that we can't see line of sight generating competitive return on capital employed.
The only area where I think there's some at odds is these people. Not all of them have locked in pensions, or at least they want to continue to have that pension grow. They want to keep their job first, stock price second. So there is definitely that concern that I see, but I can't believe, like, I wouldn't have written a letter. And the first time I met Wael, I had an honest, conversation about what I did for the company and whether it was valuable. And I said, well, I'm not going to tell you what I said, but I think a lot of these people are afraid to speak in terms that doesn't put themselves in the forefront versus what is best as a shareholder, because it really is owned by the shareholders.
Well, it's the difference between what is described in political circles as between the owner class and the managerial class.
Always
right?
A fight.
And
even
when you're looking at
person.
highly compensated individuals in oil and gas, pays very well for career professionals. The notion that guaranteed income, so to speak, is at risk is something that causes an inward look and self-preservation instincts to kick in. So
I think it was Rodney Dangerfield back to school when he was in class taking the business class, and he goes, when you were out there, while you were in here studying about your ethics, I was out busting my hump in the real world. And it always just gets to me that portions of the company are like bashing the portion that actually provides the wherewithal for them to have a job. So
that's the point that I made.
There needs to be a recognition of
that's
that.
the point I made with Wael. It's like whoever actually is generating the cash and paying the rest of us, they should probably have the biggest voice.
Yeah,
but these are people they're not making money and they're the loudest voice right now. But in some ways that has been Europe. I mean, as we saw, we briefly spoke about this earlier, but Ireland just canceled an LNG terminal because it's against their climate goals. And it was the Irish power grid that 2 years ago said, hey, over the next 5 years, if it's a cold winter, we're screwed. We're not going to have enough power. So Ireland's saying, hey, we don't want any more gas. We want renewables, but they don't have enough renewables if there is a cold, bitter winter. So there's interesting dynamics at foot here, and we should be watching Shell over the next month to see what happens.
Yeah, and we saw a more recent example of that than 2 years ago. Just last winter, in preparation or in advance of last winter, the Germans were scrambling to put together floating LNG, and we all know what happened with their coal ramp up as well. So, part of the inertia that's in LNG is due to just uncertainties contractually and what ultimate decision making and approval for terminals is going to be. But we need to get started, and I think we've got another item on here that's certainly related. Last week, Saudi announced its first international LNG investment. The world's going to continue to press forward with LNG and natural gas as a player in the sustainable portfolio of fuel and energy. So, the Saudis are very loudly, once again, saying and doing things. Don't listen to what I say, watch what I do. Saying and doing things that are, I think, flying in the face of the narrative that folks like the IEA are certainly putting out there in very long form, right? So,
yeah. Chuck?
No, I mean, I don't know what to say almost at this point in terms of us talking about this. I do think one of the things, and we've kind of teased this on the show, so I'll go ahead and just say we're going to do it. And let's say we will do it by Thanksgiving. We actually need to go around this table, and we'll make sure Colin's prostate's healthy so that he can join us. But we need to go through position by position various things and in effect give a roadmap of potentially how you handle a reasonable transition, if you will, instead of hey, we're just going to stop using fossil fuels tomorrow. Because that is part of the issue, is you do have to give kind of the other side, because it makes no sense not to use LNG, because incrementally it is a lot better than coal. But at the same time, if we don't have some sort of an end point then it just comes off like we're cranky old men from the Muppets sitting up in the balcony.
So we need a position, is what you're saying.
Yeah, we need.
So
we need a roadmap.
it's kind of thematic with the coming election year. We put together planks and policy positions, and if it's somewhat akin to what we did in Speed Round with the Energy Draft podcast a couple of years ago.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
In
there we go. All right, because I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, you know, and I do think we have to put the framework over it that we've talked about a lot on here. Is there's only so much money out there, and China and India are doing what they are doing, you know, and we've just got to account for that. And so, where do we best spend our dollars, and how do we potentially get there?
It reminds me of a clip video I saw when Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger were talking, and they're like, you know why we're so rich? Because there's a lot of stupid investors out there. I think we're sort of falling to this trap here. There's a lot of people making decisions, but you watch the Saudis, you watch the YLs, the Shells. You're seeing people, you watch China, you're seeing people that are positioning themselves to win the long run with cheap energy. I mean, it's all about cost. I mean, inflation's gone out. Renewable stocks are way down. People are frustrated. I mean, you even have in California, which is an interesting story, but PG&E CEO Patty Pope is trying to spend $6 billion to bury all the power lines to prevent wildfires. But regulators are about to kibosh it because they're saying it's going to cost so much money that we're already the most expensive state in the union. People can't afford it. What's interesting is the CEO of the largest regulated utility is not thinking about the cost to people. She's like, hey, if I can cram all this money, I get paid. I mean, utilities make money by spending more money. So
increase the rate base.
It's
just so lack of insight. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's to your point, Chuck. What gets us over the hump or across the bridge with, you know, things like natural gas to whatever else is next, right? It's what does all this cost and who pays for it?
Yeah. And there's only so much of that. And at the end of the day, none of us can foresee the future. So we kind of got to make our best bets along the way.
Right.
And, yeah, because that kind of rolls into the next thing.
We have a lot of non-elected leaders and voices that are casually throwing around borderline demanding that the world or the responsible world, meaning responsible for the damage that's been inflicted, the alleged damage that's been inflicted, to spend trillions of dollars that certainly people would be very hard pressed to absorb, right?
Yeah.
Given what's going on here recently with inflation, et cetera. But that's the other thing in this is that we need, as Doomberg says, thermodynamics is a ruthless referee, right? So we need, and we've talked about this before, we need more technical and science perspective at the table figuring all this out.
Yeah. As well as just a reasonable view of humanity that a life lost today because of higher energy prices or lack of energy or lack of fertilizer to grow food is just as bad as a life lost potentially 75 years from now because the planet's 1.5 degrees warmer. So we need that perspective too. All right. So you heard it right here on BDE. We've committed to actually doing this before Thanksgiving. We'll come back to you guys with a date. But this kind of rolls into the next point that we talked about last week. You know, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom came out and said, hey, we're going to push back the banning of the internal combustion engine till 2035 instead of 2030. And basically said that's going to be too much of a hardship on the average citizen if we get rid of internal combustion engines. So we're going to push it back 5 years. And, you know, I think that rolls into what we talked. Colin and I talked that last week. That's rolling into the F-150. What's going on with those?
Well, there's rumors of not yet confirmed. There's rumors that there are order cancellations, kind of sweeping across the dealer network, and it kind of goes hand in glove with what we've talked about previously as well, in terms of dealers having to handle and increasingly deal with burgeoning or bloating EV inventory, right? So Lightning is a very high profile, I think. It's really a flagship vehicle for Ford's EV aspirations, and to run into, I think, what one of our colleagues has recently experienced in terms of things like fast charger availability and range anxiety, and the fact that the vehicle is at a price point that is yet still unattainable by many, is showing up in building inventory and a softer market than I think was anticipated.
Yeah, I know Dad's, in addition to kind of your range anxiety, finding charger infrastructure, Dad has the Mustang, the Mach, the electric, and Dad's buys technology the first day it comes out and then never upgrades. We still have the first VCR ever made in the United States at the Yates house somewhere, probably playing Caddyshack.
Do you know how valuable VHS tapes are now? It's amazing.
That may be,
as long as you have the right movies on there.
Might be there, but Dad's had a piece go out on the charger at home and just can't get it replaced. I mean, they've got big backlogs in terms of all that, and so I mean they're having real issues. They're wildly unprofitable. They're actually, performance isn't living up. They're figuring out when you're towing a bunch of stuff, range gets cut in half and all the rumors. So this isn't surprising.
I've been thinking about this. The original research that came out was based on technology that once a technology gets about 7% adoption in a market in the U.S., for example, it's a step function growth in that technology.
It's the S curve.
It's the S curve. Yeah. Now that's based on things like XM radio and
software,
refrigerators.
But these are $80,000 technology pieces, so it's a very different scale. My question is, if the Ford Lightning, it's a rumor, but we heard about a battery. There's a battery plant, Mark, that you could talk about. Is this a hiccup, or is this wait a minute? We sort of went out of the gate too soon. Let's re-step. Is this a restart?
Well, this is a Ford plant. I just saw the headline, hitting the brakes on a $3.5 billion battery plant investment in Michigan. All these things are, I think, ultimately related, right? It's just the timeline over which all this gets put together and works. We used to say everybody can hold their breath underwater for a minute. Let's see who can do it for 10.
Right.
And Ford being very public in disclosing what the financial reality is of its EV division. I think we talked about it a few shows ago. They're projected to lose $3 billion this year. Brian Sullivan, CNBC, tweeted out this morning on Rivian. I saw one data point in there. Rivian is losing $33,000 per SUV.
That's it? You don't understand the internet, Mark.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, this is the intersection, the unique intersection of the digital world that has that S-curve history, the step change history after that penetration, and the very nasty physics or physical world-based reality.
I'm with you.
Building cars is hard, right?
Hardware
at scale
is hard.
And cost effectively.
Hey, quick question. I see on my screen up there's a big mute button. Does that mean I'm not on?
That's a hint. No, I think we're all right. I think that just flashes like that periodically.
All right.
Okay.
So.
Let's keep going.
There we go.
Is it a hiccup or is it a restart? You're saying, I think, from what reading between the lines, Mark, it's a restart, maybe.
Well, the weird thing about this is if this were the free markets, and say what you want about the .com bubble, that was pretty big free market. I mean, this is the IRA not mandating, but strongly suggesting that EVs are the wave of the future. And so I just don't know how to think through the future with that big hammer.
Okay,
so
more simply, in autos, which is a big industry and it's a critical industry, are big tax incentives a sustainable business model in a free market where there's not policy mandate and there's consumer choice? If you look back to the history of CAFE standards, over 30 years, we made very modest improvements in ICE fuel efficiency because American consumers traded up for larger SUVs and better performance, bigger, more horsepower, more torque. And so that's the demand side, that's the behavior side that is now more increasingly talked about. One of the pieces about the IEA report, I didn't see it. I saw Javier Blas tweeted about it. He said one of the more interesting things was this suggestion, proposal, idea, scenario that we ban cars, diesel and gasoline cars, private vehicles in big cities by 2035.
Listen,
and one of the replies to that was, I don't know who replied, but this is kind of it was a German client activist said, okay, well, those that have a car for traveling longer journeys outside of the city during leisure time, how will they, quote unquote, be dealt with?
Wow. Let me ask y'all a question. Look, I don't give a fuck about the IEA. Who cares what they say?
Right.
What we should be, and what I think our audience cares most about, is that they care what we're seeing real people that have money to spend, people that have lives on the line, such as companies, not politicians, but like the media. Does it matter what they like their forecast? Because it's all today. It's moved from, hey, this is what the past said, we're going to project the future. It's now they're sort of telling the world what they want to see. Shouldn't we be reading the tea leaves from people that are actually making decisions?
Yes, we do that as a normal course of analyzing in the way of talking about things. But to say that ideally the IEA, the UN, the NGO leaders of the narrative or one side of the narrative are not, who cares? I think that just isn't political reality, and political reality has to be dealt with as we think about energy policy and putting sound, well thought out, scientifically based, economically based energy policy in place around the world where, consumers, the electorate have free will. And so there is a significant influence on the way people think about it and get behind certain ideas that may not be practical if we're trying to make the leap from natural gas to, full wind power and solar power.
See how I set you up for that, Mark?
Well,
you're welcome.
Well, and you guys are right.
I thought I was going to go Roy McIlroy on Joe LaCava.
On Joe LaCava?
Yeah.
No, I was just setting you up for that because I actually do care, but I wanted to see your reaction to that. We do have to take them into consideration.
We're on the same side of the table.
We're actually on both sides.
You two can go get a room. It's okay. No, but I think you guys are absolutely right. The other thing we have to do, though, and if I said IEA earlier, I meant IRA. I mean, we have to read our politicians in Washington and figure out, the IRA came in, heavy duty on incentives, almost to the point of this is what we're doing. Think Captain Renault and Casablanca. Let's just say it's my request. That is a more pleasant word. But do they take it the next step further? I mean, do they start throwing bans out? I mean, because that's, look at Trudeau. Look at Trudeau in Canada and see how far a leader is willing to go in terms of.
You already have de facto bans in Europe. I drove around, as I think you did this summer, and was a little surprised to when I got my rental car, they offered me an upgrade because the one I had was not certified or permitted for the ultra low emission zones, right? So as an everyday European, not generalizing about Europe, but just making a point, if I can't afford that type of vehicle and then I'm now restricted from going in those places and driving, I can't afford to get to certain places, is that not a banning kind of here and now that's upon us?
No,
yeah. And I'm here to say I've like been won over by my brother Bobby, who claims that Bill Gates wants a chip in every one of us, and oil-filled Rando who and all that. I'm right there. The conspiracy theorists are right. Although I was sharing
Humane, that has raised over a couple $100 million, and Sam Altman from OpenAI is one of their big backers. They just they put a wearable AI wearable device on Naomi Campbell during a big fashion event, and so this stuff is coming. It's here.
So I went on my rant about how they want EVs so they can track us. Y'all have heard me do that a million times. And the guy I was talking to said, Chuck, do you have a license plate? They can already do that with the license plate. So don't worry, you're behind on that.
This is true.
You know, when I went to Europe this summer, I don't know if this happened in the German airports where you were, we didn't even have to show our passport. It was facial recognition in the Helsinki airport.
Everyone knows Chuck.
Well, you walked in. I'm like, when do I have to show my passport? And they're like, no, we got you. So,
I will say this is how, I was in Europe speaking of Ryder Cup, since we just finished one, I was at the Ryder Cup in Valderrama in Spain. And my dad being poor dad, but dad thinks he's going to rent a large car. He picked the large rental car. And we get into España, me and one of his buddies and me. And the car is so small that us three Americans with our luggage couldn't fit into it.
And it was the large.
It was the large. It was like, Europe's been doing this since the beginning of time. For one, it's smaller. The roads are tiny. And, in the history before we were around, people were smaller.
Yeah.
So I think this trend has been happening for a long, long time. It's just funny now that it's gotten so politicized. But
it does.
But man, do they drive really fast, and it's great.
The Italians.
All right, from Vegas. We stayed at the Encore when we were there on our poker excursion. We overlooked the Sphere. Do you guys know about the Sphere?
It's creepy. The big eye, man.
Yes.
Big eye. So James Dolan, Madison Square Garden builds this thing. I think it's supposed to cost $1.2 billion. It costs $2 or $2.5 billion, something like this. It's wild. Go Google it. Look up pictures. Maybe we'll get a picture embedded in this video. But anyway, 160,000 speakers, 1.2 million LED lights the size of hockey pucks, 580,000 square feet of programmable lighting. Literally, Nevada Energy had to build a dedicated solar energy field to be able to power this thing, and it's going to come online April of 2027. The Sierra Solar Project with all these batteries, 18,000 square feet. The amount of power it's going to use.
18,000 square feet.
I'm sorry, 18,000 seats arena.
That's not very big.
Nice.
That is a perfect size venue.
Nice. But
I'm just thinking about Rice Stadium, speaking of.
There you go.
Well, this is indoors.
More people can sit in Rice Stadium than have ever attended the university.
That's right.
That's right. So, but anyway, so this is the Sphere. Have we figured it out? Is it 96 gigawatts it's going to use a year? Gigawatt hours of power, I think it's going to use during the year.
It's not 150 terawatt hours per year.
It's not that.
It's a lot.
But it's still a lot. And just some comparables on that. That's the same as 533,000 electric vehicles driving 12,000 miles a year would use. It's about the amount of electricity a small town of 9,000 to 10,000 households would use. If we wanted to, at our big slumber party that we need to get rescheduled, we could actually pop 960 million bags of popcorn with that amount of electricity.
There you go.
And so the reason
Or you could buy one day's advertising on the Sphere for the low price of $450,000.
Which, by the way, maybe we start a GoFundMe. But anyway, no, the reason I bring this all up is one, just in Vegas and saw it, and it's just spectacular.
I can see it now, the Chuck Job podcast logo with Chuck sprawled
over the eye.
Over the eye.
I love that. I like that. That would be a great birthday gift, guys. But anyway, no, but the reason I bring this up, one, I saw it. It was cool as all get out. This weekend was opening weekend. U2 was there. A couple of buddies actually went. I'm getting videos. It's just stunning. It's spectacular. That's a lot of freaking power. And maybe this winds up just being a Vegas thing, like whatever. But does this become the standard for music performance venues in the top 50 or 75 metropolitans in the world?
First of all, it is cool. I want to go back to what you said about the solar facility. Is that going to completely replace what's powering the Sphere now? Is that
it's 70%?
70%.
Is what they talk about.
What's powering it now? What is?
I guess it's the electric grid in Las Vegas. So it's the big dam
so it's hydro.
It's hydro, yeah. And this isn't even a renewables versus hydrocarbon thing. It's just we talk time and time again about the demand for power and what electricity.
I keep arguing that as we keep asking for more and more electronics. I mean, look, Houston being the energy capital of the world as it is, we've had an eye for forever, and it's always been it's been analog. We've had an eye across the city. You've seen it. I've seen it. He's always watching. Dr. Ed Young.
Oh, that's right.
Second Baptist. He's everywhere. He's on every billboard, every major artery. Dr. Ed is watching you. And we've had an eye. So when I saw the eye, I was like, Dr. Ed has finally been trumped, but it took 30 years to do it.
Well, and I don't know Dr. Ed Young, so I don't mean to disparage, but I have heard one of his big disappointments in life is they've never let him into the Houston Country Club. And he supposedly applies every other year.
I need to ask about that one.
Yeah, do ask about that one. Don't know if that's a true story. But, again.
Speaking of power gen and all this new electronic demand, I think you had some tidbits about power generation under development.
I did. So a report came out not too long ago.
See how it set you up for that?
You did. Wow.
I didn't get the pre-show notes on this. I'll just sit over here and watch.
Eat my
popcorn.
In the past year, global capacity and development for coal power plants increased 16%, and oil and gas plants by 13%. So coal on a percentage basis is leading oil and gas. Now, where is that coming? I mean, so the rest of the world, coal plant capacity has been going down. So the rest of the world is right now, in terms of development, is under 200 gigawatts. China, on the other hand, in 2019, their coal plant capacity was around 200 gigawatts themselves. They're now almost doubled. So if you look at coal plants in development, 557 gigawatts are in development today, 204 gigawatts under construction, 260 in pre-construction, 93 gigawatts announced, almost all that in China.
Well, we did see, if you remember, when Pakistan unsuccessfully procured LNG cargoes, got no bid
right
over the winter. They came out with a policy shift and said, we're going to quadruple our coal-fired generation. So we're going to start to see that in other markets that need energy in the most critical situations and power, for their just daily life. And having lived there for a bit of time, I know the reliability of the grid is not great. And so if you start to exacerbate that, that all trickles down and then causes unfortunate and unfavorable political circumstances. So we're going to see, I think, an acceleration of that type of pivot if we can't be
more constructive,
more balanced, fairer, and really cognizant and acknowledging. I think the African Union said basically we're not going to be kind of side players in this. We're going to have a primary place at the table. And if you think about where the 1.9 billion people that will be added to the planet between 2020 and 2050 are going to live, 1.2 billion of those 1.9 billion are going to be in key countries in Africa that are very high population growth, that don't have the best power generation and grid reliability situation today. And so if we're not addressing that practically and proactively, I think these problems just...
It can't be let them eat cake. It just cannot be, because that will not be good. You know what's wild about your stats, Kirk, is we use 4 trillion kilowatt hours in the United States of power in 2022. We used more than more than China did in 2010. They passed us in 2010, and now they use 2x what we use.
So I'm gonna read you a quote. You tell me where it's from.
Okay.
The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting.
There you go, Sun Tzu, The Art of War.
So the art of war, which emphasizes the importance of flexibility, creativity, and deception in warfare. So, written by a Chinese strategist philosopher. So, despite the so when I think about the art of war, I think of what's happening right now. China. So one of the quotes from this article: despite the coal production, analysts believe China's renewable energy production capacity may help achieve its emission targets possibly ahead of time. Who is totally winning right now? How do they subdue the enemy? We're all trying to get to renewable as fast as possible. No more coal, no more LNG. China, on the other hand, is like, build as many coal plants as fast as you can. Let's get there. And at the same time, we're winning the renewable race. Well, they are winning in terms of the supply chain, but even they're like, our emissions are going to outpace at some point. I'm just like, man, wow.
Yeah. What's the traditional greeting in the Chinese army? General, I enjoy your chicken and not yours. Mark, close us out with baseball. I sat around and didn't know what to make of all this, so please explain.
Last day of the regular season, a week before the Texas Rangers controlled their destiny, the Astros and the Mariners had played pretty weak, and I'm talking about the AL West. And so on the last day of the season, after having lost 2 of 3 in Seattle, the Rangers dropped a 1-0 shutout nail biter to the Mariners to then allow the Astros, who swept the Arizona Diamondbacks in Phoenix, to, based on the tiebreaker, take the division title for the 6th time in 7 years in the last 6 full regular seasons. That knocks out 2020, which was the 60-game sprint and then the tournament in Dallas. And so the background noise in all this yesterday was kind of fun to listen to and watch. There was complaining about, by the Rangers broadcasters, that the Diamondbacks were not playing some of their superstars. Well, the Diamondbacks' playoff future had already been decided the night before. They have to jump on a plane and go immediately to Milwaukee and play a 3-game wild card series against the Brewers. And so preparing for that is really their priority. But the Astros jumped on pretty quickly to an 8-0 lead and took care of business yesterday. Meanwhile, the Rangers are facing George Kirby, who was one of the top starters for the Mariners this year. And he lasted 6 innings and shut them out for 6 innings. But then they brought in a succession of none of their high leverage relievers. So young pitchers, one of which was making only his 2nd major league appearance. So you had every opportunity to overcome a 1-0 lead with that juggernaut offense that has been most of the Rangers' story, and they couldn't do it. But let's blame everything else outside of our control and not take care of our own business. And so the Astros now have a 5-day rest between now and the start of the division series on Saturday at home. Meanwhile, in irony of ironies, the Rangers are having to fly about as far as you can across the continental United States from Seattle to Tampa to take on the Rays, which hold the number 1 wild card spot. The winner of that series has to play Baltimore, which has been the best team in the American League this year. And because the Rays had their spot secured, their batting average leader rested yesterday. Meanwhile, Corey Seager went 0-for-4 for the Rangers, and he dropped out of the batting title lead at the same time. Finally, this is a karma turnabout for 2017 when during Harvey, the Astros asked the Rangers if they could swap home and home series with the Arlington facility because it was impossible to play in Houston right around that time of Hurricane Harvey. The Rangers said no. They had to go to Tampa to play neutral ground series against both the Rangers and then ultimately the New York Mets. So they weren't lending a helping hand to Houston then, and I think it's deliciously ironic that they have to go to Tampa to play the Rays when they could have won the division pretty easily.
To finish with a quote from The Art of War, opportunities multiply as they are seized. Well done, Strohs.
Nice. All right, everybody. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, please comment, please share it with a friend. Glad to have you back. We next, I think Thursday night is the prayer visual for Colin's prostate, and hopefully we'll have him back next week.